I'm Wanjiru Gikonyo. I'm an advocate for good governance and accountability. I'm also a concerned citizen, and so I get involved in issues of state and governance because I believe as a country we can do better, and I believe we are very entrepreneurial, enterprising people, and if we had the right governance systems, we would, have an inclusive and very progressive state. Of course, there wasn't adequate public participation. The government has proceeded on the basis of managing public participation for its own ends. And we have a case on this in court in terms of the tokenism of public participation, especially in the national budget process. So yes, there are conversations. Yes, there are avenues. There was a request, an invite for submissions. There have been conversations with various actors. But at the end of the day, are those issues heard? So no, there wasn't adequate public participation, but there is more to it than that, because the framework of the finance bill is the debt crisis. Has there been adequate conversation and disclosure around the debt crisis? The finance bill is also driven by the expenditure priority. So you have to go back to how did this government set its expenditure targets and ceilings and priorities. And you will find in all those there is curated participation. And at the end of the day, political interests win the day. That said, there are real concerns, and there is a real need to pay attention to how we will raise and manage revenue so that we can restore the economy. Because at present, we are not, we're in a very bad economic situation. Maybe the final point I would say is that, unfortunately, the promises made by the Kenya Kwanza administration, one was we are going to reduce taxation, because at that time they recognized Kenyans were overtaxed. This broad statement means some sectors that pay a lot of tax were paying too much tax, while other sections were not. Also, we are losing about 500 billion plus in terms of uncollected tax revenue every year. So when you say Kenyans are overtaxed, it's not about the percentage of tax collection to GDP, because that should go up. It's about the leakages. It's about who's not paying, who's getting exemptions, who's able to escape the tax net, which money is paid and then pocketed. So I would say, and then also on the expenditure side, the tax is driven by the expenditure. And in fact, we've said that the debt crisis we have in Kenya is an expenditure problem, because that money has gone into non-productive projects that have been funded by expensive debts whose conditions and conditionalities we are not even aware of. So the underpinning problem is a lack of accountability, and linked to that, a lack of prudence. As David D said, this is a profligate government. We're looking at profligate spending by a government that's supposedly in a fiscal consolidation program. And they have very cynically decided that the brunt of profligate spending, waste, and lack of accountability will be borne by the middle class, the salaried class, but have not also spared the hustlers. Because when you talk about increasing VAT on fuel and petroleum products and such, those taxes hit the poorest the most. So this government has reneged on its on its election promises. They haven't really sat down to think about these principled positions they took, because if we look at the KK manifesto, they did public participation, and we saw they had forums here and there. So whatever got into the manifesto is what the people said. It then needed them to sit and do the hard work and figure out, how do we, in the middle of a debt crisis, with all these debt commitments, how do we then reduce taxation? And the idea of reducing taxation is to give an enabling environment for business to thrive. because a lot of businesses are struggling. And if you burden them more, they will lay off people and others will shut down. So they didn't do that. And I would say it's a failure, abject failure of this administration that they didn't try to deal with that. They also said they would reduce the expenditure budget. They made some, kind of statements on what they had done, but then they continued to add on other wasteful expenditures. So the other aspect of that is they've gotten into office and the temptation to eat is too great. And like I said, the underpinning issue is lack of accountability. This goes to the appointments that have been made, the failure of the corruption cases, which sends a message that public officers can get into office, do what they want without consequence. So without safeguards, and with a parliament that then has been bought out by the president, because the president is calling people to State House and they are voting for the president's policies, we then lack any checks and balances on this administration. We're in a de facto authoritarian state. In fact, the letter of the law has been superseded by the reality. And unfortunately, this government then believes it can impose misadvised policies, because this finance bill is misadvised. They are hitting Kenyans with new taxes when they are withdrawing the social protections that Kenyans have enjoyed. For instance, NHIF. We've seen that NHIF now is no longer giving the services that were there before. Linda Mama, which is this maternity facility, is no longer in operation. HELB, that was supporting tertiary education, is no longer there. So they are withdrawing services, increasing taxation, and they've decimated accountability. Really, this is a coup. This is a very bloodless coup against the Constitution of Kenya and the people of Kenya. But it's just being done with such charm and charisma. We haven't realized what's happening. If you look at it at a very basic level, it's about incentives. They're stealing money, dipping one's hand in public coffers, getting appointed to a state office, and then getting involved in deals pays. Our social incentive structure favors corruption. So right now, actually, all of us need to be running for public office, because that's where you make the most money, that's where you get the best salaries. Public office is more lucrative than private sector. So it's very inefficient, it's very, the wrong projects, wrong price, but very good payoffs. So our incentive structure is totally messed up. And that has to do with the politics, that has to do with the failure of the checks and balances that were envisaged. But it has to do a lot with the leadership. We have to remember that what we are suffering today is a continuation of the disastrous Uhuru Ruto presidential ticket. That was disastrous because this was a team that did not believe in the new constitution. This was a team that does not believe in the democratization agenda, the devolution agenda, the social justice agenda. These are deal makers and tenderpreneurs, and they have brought that culture. So we have had for the last 10 years a battle between the head of state and his administration and the Constitution of Kenya. We now have a new president who also is at odds with the Constitution. And this one is more energetic, is more relentless, is very fast in doing things. So our bigger question is how do we deal with the political onslaught that is now manifest. So I would say the finance bill is a manifestation of the political onslaught. This is a small indicator of bigger things to come. When you say you're privatizing public assets and you're doing so without parliamentary approval, what are you saying? When we hear the kind of stories that Kenya is, when Kenya is involved in regional negotiations, that those political leaders around the table make sure that their companies and interests are factored into those political arrangements. For instance, the GMO debate. We hear rumors of who are the beneficiaries of this GMO approach that will disenfranchise the small-scale farmer, that will disenfranchise even local technology and local seed management. So I would say since 2013, we've been on a slide into a very scary place. And that slide has now picked up pace. And I think Kenya will be unrecognizable if we don't get the resources to kind of stop it. And the finance bill is a good start. And I'm hoping the threatened protests, the promised protests will take place, that the teachers, the health sector, the civil society will really protest so we can push back, because we must push back. But at the end of the day, we need to recognize our governance, our electoral system is not serving us. We must ask, how do we get these kind of leaders in office whose agenda, their common agenda is self-interest, and they're able to kind of rubber stamp and produce reports that are held up to be very good reports, but at the same time they're decimating, eviscerating the state and state resources and enriching themselves. So we need to go back to the drawing board and really ask the fundamental questions. But it starts with fighting the finance bill. I would say one is the presidential system has shown it's not serving us. It is costly, and even the world over, this adversarial presidential system is not working. Even look at the states. Parliamentary system seem to work better. There's talk about this kind of shared government because of our real ethnic cleavages. So I think it's time we just said, yeah, anyway, this Western democratic ideal model, let's get a Kenyan solution. The other for me is devolution. I think devolution has saved us so far, in that devolution prevented us in 2013 and 2017 from kind of a slide into violence when we had a contested presidential result. Devolution has made marginal gains in service delivery, but it hasn't realized its potential. So the other is devolution. How do we entrench that subsidiarity, self-governance? So for me, the third is that self-governance, the people. Kenyans work hard, Kenyans contribute well into national development, but of course Kenyans have become part of this kind of, we've colluded to eat from the state. So how do we recover? How do we get Kenyan, the public, how do we get this self-governance? How do we get this philosophy that will bring back that dignity, that sense of self-justice? So yeah, there are fundamental questions about the design and structure of the Kenyan state, but it starts, to my mind, with those.